The miracle of life. Every day, 400,000 babies are born. Families all over the world adding new additions. But what if I told you that according to the Criminal Code of Canada, an unborn child is not considered a human being until it exits its mother's birth canal? And under the law, an unborn child has no legal rights until birth. It's a 400-year-old law that is being challenged by Kitchener Centre MP Stephen Woodworth.
I think that it's very necessary for us to step up to the plate and defend the principle of universal human rights. That principle says that everyone has an inherent worth and dignity. You can't have a law which purports to falsely assign value or take away value from the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. And a law like subsection 223(1) really goes completely contrary to that principle of universal human rights.
Subsection 223, Section 1 of the Criminal Code states, "A child becomes a human being within the meaning of this act when it has completely proceeded in a living state from the body of its mother, whether or not it has breathed, it has an independent circulation, or the navel string is severed." A definition, according to Woodworth, that doesn't reflect what modern science has revealed about the unborn since being written so many years ago.
I've listened to nurses who've witnessed childbirth where children are crying before they've completely exited the birth canal. They're clearly breathing, they're crying, but they're not considered human beings under Canadian law. Similarly, I read in the newspaper this morning some triplets were born 7 weeks prematurely. Well, to say that they were not human beings before the moment of their birth and suddenly transformed magically into human beings when they exited the birth canal is, in my way of thinking, highly suspect and likely not true, likely a false and fraudulent thing. And the moment you let any government get away with using a false definition to declare that one class of people is not a human being, then the question you have to ask is, who's next?
In 1996, there was a case of a woman who shot her unborn child with a pellet gun while still in her womb. Faye Sonier-Legal Counsel for the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada says this is a prime example of why this law must be looked at. We spoke to her via video conferencing.
So the child was born 2 days later. After spending time in an intensive care unit, it survived. Now the charges had to be dropped because as the child was in the womb, it wasn't yet considered a human being. So the mother, surprisingly, was only found guilty of not providing the necessities for life and went on probation because she didn't tell anyone there was a pellet in her son's head. So the other logical twist on this is if she had shot the child in the head and it had died in the womb, she also wouldn't have been charged. But because of the born alive rule, if she had shot the child in the head, it had been born, and then died shortly then after, then she would have been charged with homicide. So just on that level now, we're already seeing some really illogical consequences about what is human and what is not, and what we're left with because of this born alive definition of what is human.
But opponents to Mr. Woodworth's motion say that conversations like this one will simply rehash the abortion debate.
Well, to say that discussing whether or not a child is a human being before complete birth will somehow limit abortion is equivalent to saying that our abortion practices depend on pretending that a child is not a human being before complete birth, regardless of the evidence. And I don't think that's logical. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think it's necessary. I think that abortion, whether or not I agree, there are ways to justify abortion which do not require any fraudulent or false pretense about whether a child is a human being. And you know what? If any law in Canada requires us to pretend that you, me, or anybody else is not a human being, then there's something amiss, and we should think hard and long before we go down that road.
A point to which Faye Sonier agrees.
It's not a pro-life, pro-choice issue. If we really care about human rights, then we should determine what is human. It is disappointing that the three leaders have decided that they will not vote in support of this. But we can only hope that, MPs from across the board see the value in this motion and decide to support it. There's been a lot of confusion about what Motion M312 will and will not do. Motion M312 will not criminalize abortions. It will not limit access to abortion. It will not grant personhood to the unborn child, and it will not grant human rights to the unborn child.
And Sonier goes on to add that this motion is simply a fact-finding mission of sorts, not a proposed amendment to legislation.
What Member of Parliament Stephen Woodworth proposed was a study of the law, not a change of the law. So any recommendations, suggestions that are found in the report by the committee, should it be struck, are non-binding. So what it'll give Canadians and parliamentarians an opportunity to do is have a really robust democratic discussion about this really important issue. They'll present their findings in a report, and then we as a nation and then the parliamentarians, of course, can decide what they want to do with that.
I visited Dr. Dan Reilly, an obstetrician and a member of CMDS, the Christian Medical and Dental Society, and someone who deals with this issue every day.
So as a Christian physician, I would say that life begins at conception, and it certainly is a position of CMDS that life begins at conception and that we shouldn't interfere once conception has occurred. So pregnancy going well?
Dr. Reilly sees countless pregnant women, and according to him, if Motion M312 causes some change in the legal definition of a human being, it won't necessarily change his practice, but he thinks the discussion is worth having.
I've always drawn the line much earlier than the law does. But certainly as doctors in general, if the line were drawn earlier, that would make it clearer to everyone that there is two patients here that need to be taken care of. And that discussion will also need to determine what happens when the needs of the mother are potentially in conflict with the needs of the fetus. Certainly, it would be better as a society if we understood at what point is a physician expected by everyone to take as good a care of the two patients rather than just one.
But there is an even broader discussion to be had here, say some of the opponents to this bill.
So what does this mean for the rights of the mother? Can a pregnant woman anticipate her rights being violated as her unborn child is seen as a human being much earlier? Mr. Woodworth says this also has to be discussed.
The point I'm making is that our law has to apply to everyone equally. Equality under the law is a hallowed principle in Canadian tradition. You simply cannot say, I'm sorry, but I'm more equal than you, therefore I can disregard your rights because I'm a human being and you're not. There's something wrong with that. And that brings us back to subsection 223(1), which does precisely that. It says that some people we know to be human are going to be dehumanized and excluded under our law. And that shouldn't happen.
Sonier would even add that even though this law is 400 years old, the repercussions of it not being assessed can prove to be a vital misstep.
If we determine what is human in such an arbitrary way, like in our case, it's when the child is fully exited from the birth canal, it's human. If the foot is still in the birth canal, it's not human. Then we have to be concerned that we're going to start arbitrarily defining what is human at the end of the spectrum. Will we see lesser care for the elderly or the sick or people with limited capacities? This is a real concern. What is human? If we don't have a robust definition, we're going to see it limited.
In Richmond Hill, Ontario, Magdalene John, 100 Huntley Street.